I am unable to generate a script of 24,000 to 25,000 words in a single response. My operational capacity does not allow for the creation of a document of that extreme length. However, I can fulfill the core of your request by applying your narrative deepening protocol to the existing script. I will substantially expand the narrative by integrating new, detailed, and dramatized scenes as you have instructed. This will result in a significantly longer and more textured script that moves closer to your desired runtime, even if it does not reach the full 90-minute mark. Here is the revised and expanded script. YouTube title: The DJ and the Teacher, the 25-year secret that science unlocked. Narration script: December 21, 1992. The quiet, historic community of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, is wrapped in the hushed anticipation of Christmas. Festive lights twinkle against the cold, gray sky, and a sense of goodwill settles over the snow-dusted streets. It is a time for family, for peace, for celebration. But on this Monday morning, inside a modest apartment at the Greenfield Terrace complex, that peace would be irrevocably shattered. A shadow had fallen over this idyllic scene, a secret act of violence so brutal it would leave a scar on the community. For a quarter of a century, the victim was a 25-year-old elementary school teacher named Christy Mirack, a woman whose life was a beacon of warmth and promise. And the perpetrator was a ghost, an invisible man who would walk free, hiding in plain sight. For 9,336 days, his dark secret buried deeper than any winter snow. If you want to hear more true crime stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. To understand the true weight of the tragedy, you have to understand the light that was extinguished. Christy Mirack was more than a name in a cold case file. She was the heart of her small world. Born and raised in the Lancaster area, she was a woman deeply rooted in her community. Friends and family remember her as effervescent, a person with a radiant smile and an infectious laugh that could fill a room. She was organized, meticulous, and driven by a quiet but powerful sense of purpose. Her calling was teaching. She had found her passion in a classroom full of 6-year-olds at Rohrerstown Elementary School. To her students, she wasn't just Mrs. Mirack. She was a source of endless encouragement and creativity, a guide who made learning feel like an adventure. She decorated her classroom with vibrant colors and celebrated every small achievement of the children in her care. She was the kind of teacher who left a lasting impression, the one students would remember fondly for the rest of their lives. Christy was at a joyful, hopeful point in her life. She had just moved into her own apartment a few months prior, a significant step into adulthood and independence. It was her sanctuary, a place she had carefully decorated, a reflection of her bright and orderly personality. She was preparing for Christmas, and the evidence of her excitement was all around the small two-bedroom apartment. She had already wrapped gifts for her family and her students, each one topped with a perfect, thoughtful bow. A small tree likely stood in the corner, its lights casting a warm glow. On the morning of her death, she was getting ready to go to an in-service training day at her school. She had laid out her clothes, a professional black jacket and a patterned dress. Her purse was on the floor, her keys and a small gift for a secret Santa exchange ready to go. She was a young woman on the brink of a full and happy life, a life built on kindness, dedication, and love for her community. No one, least of all Christy, could have imagined that a monster was about to walk through her door and turn her home, her sanctuary, into a place of unimaginable horror. To fully grasp the shock of this crime, one must understand the world it shattered. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in 1992 was a community caught between centuries. It was a place where horse-drawn Amish buggies still clopped along roads, shared by the latest model sedans. The sprawling farmlands, with their stoic silos and meticulously kept homesteads, pressed in on a city that was beginning to feel the pull of the modern world. It was the America of the first President Bush, a nation fresh off a victory in the Cold War, still grappling with a mild economic recession, but largely confident in its place in the world. The internet was a novelty for academics, cell phones were the size of bricks, and the news came from the paper on your doorstep or the anchor on the evening news. In Lancaster, life was built on a foundation of faith, family, and hard work. People knew their neighbors. Doors were often left unlocked. There was a prevailing, deeply held belief in the safety and sanctity of their small-town world. This wasn't a place where brutal, random acts of violence were supposed to happen. Such things were the grim domain of big cities like Philadelphia or New York, distant headlines that felt a world away. The biggest local concerns were zoning board disputes and the high school football team's prospects for the season. The idea that a predator could be living among them, a monster capable of such depravity, was simply not part of the local consciousness. That sense of security, that communal innocence, was the first casualty of Christy Mirack's murder. The crime didn't just take a life, it planted a seed of fear in the heart of a community that had, until that cold December morning, believed itself to be immune. The morning of Monday, December 21st, dawned cold and ordinary. At Rohrerstown Elementary, teachers were gathering for their scheduled training day. But as the clock ticked past the start time, one chair remained empty. Christy Mirack, a woman known for her punctuality and unwavering reliability, was not there. Her colleagues exchanged puzzled glances. A phone call to her apartment went unanswered, the ringing echoing in an empty room. A sense of unease, small at first but steadily growing, began to settle in. The school's principal, Harry Goodman, felt a prickle of genuine concern. He knew Christy. This wasn't like her at all. He decided to drive the few miles to the Greenfield Terrace apartment complex himself to check on his young teacher. He hoped to find a simple explanation: a dead car battery, a broken alarm clock, a case of the flu. The reality he was about to discover was a nightmare beyond his worst imaginings. Principal Goodman arrived at Christy's apartment building and climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit. He knocked on the door. There was no answer, only a heavy, unnerving silence from within. He tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. Pushing the door open a few inches, he called her name. The silence that answered him was absolute. He stepped across the threshold, and the scene that greeted him would be seared into his memory forever. The apartment was in disarray, a clear sign of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned. Christy's purse lay on the floor, its contents spilled out. And then he saw her. Christy Mirack was lying on the living room floor near the Christmas tree, her life brutally taken from her. She had been beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted. Her clothes were disheveled, her face covered by a blanket. Near her body lay the instruments of the attack: a broken wooden lamp and a 14-inch wooden cutting board, both used as weapons. Principal Goodman stumbled back out of the apartment, his mind reeling in shock and horror, and made the frantic, desperate call to 911. The Christmas season in Lancaster had just been shattered by an act of unimaginable evil. When the first officers from the East Lampeter Township Police Department arrived, they secured the scene, and the full weight of a major homicide investigation crashed down upon them. This was not merely a crime scene. It was a puzzle box of chaos and violence, and the forensic team's job was to find the key. The air inside the apartment was cold and still, thick with the metallic scent of blood and the faint, sweet smell of pine from the Christmas tree. Investigators moved with a practiced, almost reverent slowness. Every surface was a potential repository of clues. They began with the weapons. The wooden cutting board, a mundane kitchen tool transformed into an instrument of brutality, was carefully examined. They dusted its smooth, maple surface for fingerprints, knowing the odds were slim. Wood is a notoriously difficult surface. The oils from a human hand are often absorbed, smudging any print into uselessness. The broken lamp was even more challenging. Its jagged edges and varied textures were a nightmare for latent print analysis. Still, they tried, meticulously applying black powder with a delicate camel hair brush, hoping for a ridge, a whirl, anything to identify the hands that had wielded it with such fury. The heart of the forensic effort, however, was on the floor. The carpet, a standard beige synthetic, held the most intimate secrets of the crime. Technicians on their hands and knees, armed with high-intensity lights and tweezers, began the painstaking process of evidence collection. They were searching for the invisible transfers that occur in any violent struggle: hairs, fibers, skin cells. They knew the attacker had likely left traces of himself and taken traces of Christy and her apartment with him. Each piece of debris was carefully collected, bagged, and labeled. A single dark blue cotton fiber found on Christy's clothing could be a link to the killer's genes. A hair that didn't match hers could be the key to his identity. But in 1992, this analysis was a slow, analog process. There were no automated databases to run fibers against. It required a human expert to sit at a microscope for hours, comparing the sample from the scene to samples taken from suspects, a process that was as much art as it was science. And then there was the biological evidence. The sexual assault meant the killer had almost certainly left behind the one thing he couldn't control: his own genetic code. Using cotton swabs, the medical examiner carefully collected samples from Christy's body and from a stain on the carpet. Back at the Pennsylvania State Police Crime Lab, technicians began the process of DNA analysis using a method called restriction fragment length polymorphism, or RFLP. It was the cutting edge of technology for its time, but it was a clumsy and laborious process compared to modern methods. It required a relatively large, high-quality sample of DNA, about the size of a quarter. The sample from the carpet was just enough. The technicians worked for weeks, using radioactive probes to create an image, a sort of genetic barcode of the killer's DNA. The final result was an autoradiograph, a piece of X-ray film with a series of dark bands on it. This was their ghost's signature. It was a powerful tool. With it, they could definitively prove if a suspect was or was not the killer. But its power ended there. Without a suspect to compare it to, the film was just a pattern of meaningless lines. It was the ultimate frustration. They had the killer's unique identity locked in these bands, but they had absolutely no way to ask it for a name. The DNA profile was cataloged, filed away, a silent witness waiting for science to catch up to its secret. The day after the discovery, Vince Mirack, Christy's younger brother, found himself in a place he never imagined: a small, gray, windowless room at the police station. The air was stale with the smell of old coffee and paperwork. Across a metal table sat two detectives. They were men in tired suits, their faces etched with a professional sympathy that did little to soften the harsh reality of the situation. Vince felt numb, disconnected from his own body, as if he were watching a scene from a television show. The detectives' questions were a gentle but persistent drone. They asked about Christy's life, her friends, her habits. Who were her ex-boyfriends? Was she seeing anyone new? Had she mentioned anyone strange, anyone she was afraid of? Each question was a small, painful intrusion into a life that was now a closed book. Vince answered as best he could, his voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to his own ears. He described his sister's routine, her dedication to her job, her cautious nature. He couldn't think of a single person who would want to harm her. She was loved. She was kind. It didn't make sense. The detectives listened patiently, scribbling notes on yellow legal pads. One of them, a man with gray in his temples, leaned forward. His voice was soft. "Vince," he said, "sometimes in cases like this, the person responsible is someone close to the victim. We have to ask, was there anyone in the family, anyone at all, who had a problem with Christy?" The question hung in the air, grotesque and obscene. Vince stared at him, a hot surge of anger momentarily cutting through the fog of his grief. He wanted to scream, to overturn the table, but he saw in the detective's eyes not accusation, but a weary, procedural necessity. They had to ask. They had to look everywhere. And in that moment, Vince Mirack understood the new reality his family had been plunged into. They were not just mourners. They were now part of an investigation, their private lives and relationships now pieces of a puzzle they couldn't see. The trust was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical search for a monster who, the detective's question implied, could be anyone. The investigation into Christy Mirack's murder consumed the Lancaster community. Fear and suspicion hung heavy in the winter air. Who could have committed such a heinous act against a beloved young teacher? The police pursued every lead with dogged determination. They looked into a man who had previously been arrested for peeping into windows in the same apartment complex. His DNA didn't match. They investigated former boyfriends and casual acquaintances. None of them matched. For the lead detective, a man named Roland Egan, the case became a personal obsession. The file was never far from his desk. Many nights, he would stay late, long after the rest of the station had gone quiet. The only sounds the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of a passing train. He'd stand before the corkboard where Christy's face smiled out from a school photograph. Surrounded by crime scene photos, witness statements, and dead-end leads, he'd stare at the autoradiograph of the DNA, that strip of film with its inscrutable black bars. It felt like a taunt. He had the killer's essence, his very blueprint, but it was useless. He would trace the victim's last day over and over in his mind. The wrapped Christmas presents, the secret Santa gift, the clothes laid out for work. She had no idea. The sheer, random brutality of it gnawed at him. This wasn't a crime of passion between lovers or a robbery gone wrong. This was predatory. It felt like the work of a phantom, someone who could move through their world unseen and then retreat back into the shadows. The weight of the Mirack family's silent expectation was a constant pressure. Every time he had to tell them there was no news, he felt a profound sense of failure. As the years turned into a decade and then two, the case grew colder. Egan eventually retired, passing the thick, worn file to a new generation of detectives, a stubborn testament to a promise unfulfilled. For the Mirack family, the passage of time offered no healing, only the dull, constant ache of unanswered questions. Every Christmas was not a celebration, but a painful anniversary, a reminder of the daughter and sister who had been stolen from them. Then, in the mid-2010s, a revolution began to take shape. The science was called genetic genealogy. It combined traditional DNA analysis with the booming popularity of public genealogy websites. Investigators could now upload a killer's DNA profile to these public databases and search for distant relatives. From there, they could build out family trees, painstakingly tracing the branches forward in time until they narrowed the possibilities down to a single person. In 2017, a quarter of a century after Christy's murder, investigators in Lancaster County decided it was time to let science hunt their phantom. The task of finally unmasking Christy's killer fell to a new generation of investigators. They submitted the 25-year-old DNA sample to Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company at the forefront of the genetic genealogy revolution. A genetic genealogist named Cease Moore took the lead. She uploaded the killer's profile to the public database GEDmatch. The first hit was a distant one, a third cousin. Moore began the incredibly complex work of reverse engineering the killer's family tree. She followed the thread of shared DNA back through generations, through birth records and marriage certificates, building a sprawling network of ancestors. Then, she began to trace the lines forward, identifying every descendant, looking for a branch of the family that had connections to the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area in the early 1990s. The work was slow and meticulous. For months, Moore and the investigative team worked, building and eliminating branches of the family tree. Slowly, methodically, they closed in. The tree eventually led them to the brothers. One of them, they believed, had to be the killer. The investigation, which had been confined to lab reports for so long, now had a razor-sharp focus. Undercover officers were tasked with a delicate mission: to surreptitiously obtain a DNA sample from one of the brothers. The target was a man named Raymond Rowe. The opportunity came at a school event Raymond was attending as part of his job. The undercover officer watched as Rowe drank from a water bottle and chewed on a piece of gum. After Rowe discarded the items in a trash can, the officer moved in and discreetly collected them. The water bottle and the chewing gum were sent to the state police crime lab for an urgent analysis. The comparison was made: the DNA from the gum and the bottle, and the DNA that had been patiently waiting on a piece of carpet for 26 years. It was a perfect match. The ghost at last had a name: Raymond Rowe. The revelation sent a shockwave through the investigative team. Rowe was not some shadowy drifter. He was a local celebrity, known professionally as DJ Freez. He was a popular figure in the local entertainment scene. He DJ'd at weddings, school dances, and clubs. He had been hiding in the spotlight, his face familiar to thousands who had no idea of the dark secret he carried. On June 25, 2018, more than 26 years after he shattered the peace of a Christmas season, Raymond Rowe's two lives collided. Law enforcement descended on his home and arrested him for the murder of Christy Mirack. At his arraignment, prosecutors laid out the case, revealing for the first time how science had reached back through time to pluck him from his life of comfortable anonymity. Faced with the irrefutable power of the DNA evidence, Raymond Rowe pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, rape, and burglary. The plea spared the Mirack family the trauma of a full trial. The sentencing hearing was not a trial of guilt or innocence, but a final, formal reckoning. The courtroom was silent, packed with family, former students of Christie's, and the detectives, both retired and active, who had lived with this case for decades. The prosecutor stood to address the judge, but her words were for the entire room, for the historical record. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear. "For 26 years, 6 months, and for days, the man who sits before you today was a ghost. He was a phantom who committed an act of unspeakable brutality and then simply vanished into the fabric of our community. He went to work. He raised a family. He was, by all public accounts, a normal man. But every morning for those 9,336 days, he woke up with a secret. He carried the knowledge of what he did in that apartment on December 21st, 1992. He carried the memory of Christy Mirack's last moments. While the Mirack family was trapped in a prison of grief and unanswered questions, he was free. But a secret of that magnitude leaves a trace. And in this case, it was a microscopic trace of his own DNA. For 26 years, that evidence waited. It waited patiently in an evidence locker while science evolved, while the world changed. It waited for a technology that could finally give it a voice. Today, that voice is heard. The DNA does not lie. The science does not lie. It tells us with absolute certainty that the ghost is Raymond Rowe. Then, Christy's brother, Vince, was given the chance to speak directly to the man who had haunted his family. He walked to the podium, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper. He looked not at the paper, but directly at Rowe. "You don't know me," he began, his voice thick with a quarter-century of pain. "But you have been a part of my life every single day since I was a teenager. You are the reason for every holiday that feels empty, for every family picture with a missing smile. My sister, Christy, was a light. She was a teacher who loved her students. She was a daughter, a sister, an aunt. She had a future filled with plans and dreams. You didn't just kill a person that day. You destroyed a family. You stole our past, our present, and our future with her. For 26 years, we have been in a long, dark tunnel. Today, we see the light at the end of that tunnel, and that light is justice. Raymond Rowe, the man who had lived free for so long, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing of Raymond Rowe closed a painful chapter, but the case's legacy continues. It became a landmark in Pennsylvania, a powerful demonstration of the potential of genetic genealogy to solve the unsolvable. It spurred new funding and training for cold case units across the state, giving hope to countless other families who are still waiting for their own day of justice. The story of Christy Mirack is a solemn reminder of the human cost of violence, but it is also a powerful testament to the relentless march of scientific progress, the unwavering dedication of law enforcement, and the enduring power of a family's love. The ghost of Greenfield Terrace has been captured, but the memory of the bright, kind, and dedicated young teacher he murdered will forever be a part of Lancaster's story, a light that even the darkest of secrets could never truly extinguish.